Hey everybody, it's Sarah Norris
and Carrie Heinck,
and we're going to talk today about self-acceptance. If you have identified or you're even just questioning if you have sensory processing disorder, or if you're somewhere on that spectrum, we've talked about sensory challenges, sensory differences. Where you are on that, there's still an element of this that's going to apply to you whether you're disordered or not. And so last week we kind of talked a little bit about the shoulds and how sometimes those get in our way. And we're going to kind of dig into how do we set those aside, how do we move forward into that state of understanding and acceptance.
Yeah, so if you remember, if you were listening in last week, we talked about adults who tell us that their whole life they felt like they should be wearing certain clothing, they should be wearing certain types of makeup, they should be touching their significant others in certain ways. And I think this is an important thing to talk about on a global span, not just with touch, but with all the sensations. I think, a lot of adults and adolescents that I talk to, they talk about kind of having shoulds and feeling that there should be a way that they should go throughout their day. And so I think starting and letting go of those and really kind of digging into who am I and what do I want.
And I think we hear a lot of times from people that come to see us or talk to us on the phone of, I've always felt different, I've always felt off, people have always given me feedback that I'm not responding the right way in situations. And there's a lot of this negative talk that we give ourselves and that we also hear from other people that things should be different. And giving up on that and moving past that, it takes some bravery and some awareness that, you know what, trying to fit into that mold is not working, it never has, and it's time to set that aside and move on and work more from the perspective of, okay, so who am I? Like you were saying, that check in of who am I, what makes me tick, why am I this way? I've always been this way, but I've never been comfortable with who that is, and taking that time to get to know yourself.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of adolescents and adults, this kind of comes throughout their evaluation process. I think it can be kind of a hard thing to always do on your own, to kind of reflect on that by yourself. And I think that's a really powerful thing that happens in our evaluation session. And we usually do an hour of feedback, just talking for an hour about what we saw in the evaluation and really helping them kind of affirm what they already knew, but having a third party telling them how they process different sensations can really kind of solidify that path to kind of get to know yourself.
Right. So one of the things that's really challenging for a lot of people, but especially those that have sensory challenges, is that self-reflection of being able to step back and kind of view yourself from afar and figure out what works, what doesn't. And you're absolutely right, having somebody else that can kind of mirror that back to you and show you that there is something going on here that's not necessarily typical, and getting that insight is really helpful.
Yeah, and then once we are kind of feeling dynamically like the individual is understanding themselves, then we start thinking about acceptance, which is a really hard thing to kind of transition into. Accepting that you're sensitive to touch, you're sensitive to auditory information. Maybe you are processing movement different than other people, and really accepting that this is the way I am. It might not be like other people around me, and I'm accepting that. And a big way that we do that in our therapy process is by giving strategies. So not just accepting it and having nothing to do with it, but I think it's so much easier to accept your differences when you feel like you have some control and some strategies that work in making it feel less intense.
Definitely. One of the big parts of feeling like you can own your life is having that understanding, but also having the tools and strategies to manage what is challenging, and being able to step back from situations, do something to fix them or make them better so that you can continue. And that is a process. It's not something, that self-discovery, you're born with. It's something that you have to learn over time, and it changes with who's there and what the environment is, and it's complex. So it is really helpful to have someone who can help you identify and help you know what the options are that you can try. But some people have identified in the comments and in some of the conversations we've seen online that, I've always had this, but just kind of figured out on my own what to do to manage it. Mm-hmm. And I think when we talked with Rachel Schneider, she made a really good point that it didn't really change the strategies she was using when she figured out what was causing her to need those strategies. It just really validated and gave her a better understanding of herself, of why she's drawn to certain situations and she flees from others. It's the same for everybody. And figuring out that specific breakdown for yourself makes a big difference in being able to identify this is going to work for me or it's not.
Yeah, and I think with the advances in social media, there are some really cool support groups in the Facebook world for adults with SPD or with sensory challenges, and reading through those and seeing kind of the acceptance that allows and that can provide, by knowing that you're not alone and hearing the different strategies for others. I think that's such a cool outlet that currently exists to kind of aid in that acceptance and identification process.
And one of the things I wanted to call out was the comment that Chrissy Lowe made on our last video. She was talking about, she knows what her sensory preferences are for clothing, and it's very particular, and that's common, that there's patterns of things that work and don't work. So that shows some really good self-understanding. But what I really loved about your comment, Chrissy, was when you were able to shift that focus to the man in your life, and you were able to understand that the way that he reacts to your touch is challenging at times. So Chrissy was talking about how when her bloke is feeling like he's concentrating, he's bothered by being touched abruptly. And she's now has this greater understanding of his sensory needs. And I think that's the next level, is once you have that self-understanding, you're able to start understanding other people more as well. And that's where you can really start getting into that problem-solving process and that shared acceptance and that shared ability to figure out what works for you. And I thought that was really cool that she shared that with the group.
Yeah, I agree. So often adults come in and they want so quickly to go to that, how can I advocate for myself? I want to be able to tell everybody in my house how this makes me feel. And really what we're finding is we really need to work on everything we talked about prior to this, kind of that understanding of yourself and then accepting yourself and then thinking about advocacy. Not only you advocating about your own needs, but you understanding the needs of others and them feeling kind of that mutual advocacy, however many people it is in your house, however many people it is in your workspace, kind of thinking about advocacy as a mutual thing rather than just a one-way communication.
Yeah, and that's something that does take, you have to be able to shift to other people's perspectives and see how they're experiencing situations. So it's really helpful for families and coworkers and communities that spend a lot of time together to actually have those conversations of, oh wow, you like that smell? That's interesting. And try to not belittle, because I think that's something very easy to do, is to say the same thing we've heard all our lives, is that what you like is wrong and what I like is right. And the truth is, it's everybody has their rights to like and dislike certain things. And figuring out a way of, well, okay, you like this smell and I like this smell, and we don't like each other's smells. Maybe we can find a third smell that we both like.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes in our therapy process, it takes even just sitting down together with those individuals in your life and just experimenting through what works, what doesn't work. And again, erasing the shoulds of what should work and finding out just what does work between a set of individuals. And like we talked about, it's going to be different with different groups of individuals.
Absolutely. So we'd love to hear from you guys on where you're at in the process of that learning about yourself, about accepting yourself, about learning about others and accepting others, and then working together to advocate for everybody's unique needs. I think one of the messages that we want to make sure is out there, and we believe wholeheartedly, is that we're all different, and that's okay. It's really okay. And it's actually really exciting when you get to that point where you can be like, it's really interesting and I can learn a little bit about what you like, but I can always go back to what I like because I know what it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.